You know, when they told me that EVA was coming to a Stoicheia nation, I just had to check it out. Welcome back everybody, Echo here, long time no see. I would just like to also give a warm welcome to everybody who's joined us after the previous BCS season. And for those interested in seeing what you'd want to play in the next season, consider sticking around. We're going to show you one of the most interesting decks, in my opinion, that have shown up in the past few months. So the deck we're going to be talking about is Estacion. This is one of the decks that came out alongside Vigilla as two of the Skyride collabs, I guess, that have recently come to Vanguard. Now, of all the decks that we have seen in the past few months, this ended up being one of the more interesting ones actually to play, because it kind of gives you a mixture of kind of the early game aggression that Stoicheia is generally capable of outputting, alongside EVA, which is generally a slightly more grindy deck. So I just really wanted to share one of these lists with you guys. This is one primarily been cooked by one of my friends, Andre, but if you guys are interested, do consider giving him a follow on Twitter. He keeps posting his lists, and there's actually a lot that I think you could learn from. He also won BSF Manchester recently, so he's not completely washed. But guys, if we jump right in, we'll be able to have a look at the list as it stands. So one of the most interesting things, in my opinion, with Estacion is the fact that it actually has one of the more interesting ride lines, primarily revolving around this Blast token. This card basically can't be moved to any other circle besides the back row and is completely unaffected by any of your opponent's cards. And once you turn grade 3, he's able to basically give your front row plus 5k for every 3 gauge that it has. And then once per turn, it can gauge anywhere between 2 and 3 cards in order to draw a card. Now, what it means by gauging is you basically take however many rear guards you choose and stick them under him as materials. These can be tokens, these can be rear guards. So effectively, as the game goes on, you're able to grind out bigger and bigger front rows, but he also kind of becomes the weak point for your deck, because even though he is unaffected, some decks like Draconic Overlord, Vermilion, and Sacrifice Glass are able to swing into it, and unfortunately that is kind of where the deck starts to fall apart. But thankfully, those decks are not too common. They have a bit of a hard time at beating other matchups, which means you're generally okay, and that's not really something to worry about. But certainly the Blast token is a really interesting mechanic that I think is kind of what helps set this deck apart from a lot of its contemporaries. So, you know, a lot of decks can feel like different nation versions of each other, but this really does feel like EVA with a little bit of an extra edge. Also, as the deck is a Skyride deck, generally those have like a bit of a theme, and the theme with Estacion is that it revolves around the 4 seasons. So you kind of have 4 different like seasonal dragons, so you can pick kind of like a autumn, spring, summer, and winter one. Although they all kind of do different things, we generally don't tend to run the spring one here. Generally, even though we have access to 4, we only tend to really run 3 here. We tend to run our Autumn Dragon, our Summer Dragon, and our Winter Dragon. So effectively the way that these work for EVA players is this Summer Dragon is our grade 2 Obscurade, this is our grade 3 Obscurade, and this is our in-archetype Combine Rusher. So their effects are similar, but kind of are just distinct enough to be able to set the deck apart, because like we said, this is a much more aggressive list. And the fact that you keep being able to stick 3 things into Soul to draw a card, cycle and pump your front row, means that you kind of generally need to play the deck with a lot more of a focus on building bodies and building board, because you're going to be the one who keeps wiping it. When it comes to our Summer Dragon, he is able to gain, when he's placed by an ability, if you have 3 or more gauges, you choose one of your opponent's rear guards and you stun it, so it cannot intercept and cannot stand during the next stand phase, as well as the fact that when your Vanguard is Estacion, and you have a Blast token on rearguard, he gains 5k power, 5k shield. So he's a bit of a body, he's a nice shield. The deck you'll find is very aggressive, like I keep saying, which means you don't really have the opportunity to guard too much, so every little helps. You'll see that you find yourself discarding triggers a little more often than you'd like, so this is definitely something worth keeping around. As well as your Winter Dragon, which when placed on rearguard by a card's ability, if you have 1 or more gauges until the end of your opponent's turn, this card basically gains resist and a critical, and then from rearguard or hand, at the beginning of the guard step, you can sack him, and then give your Vanguard 10k power until the end of turn. So notably, this isn't guarding, you're basically discarding him for the effect. So this can come up in cases like, you know, Battle Door, or if you just call him on the rear and he stays there. And generally, the resist part doesn't really come up. The crit tends to really come up when you're going first, and you really want to aggro your opponent. But until then, that's not really too big a deal, and it wouldn't be something you need to worry about too much. Meanwhile, our Combine Rusher is actually fantastic. So when you play a plant gauge, you can CB1 and call him, and then when he's called, you create a plant token on the rearguard, which is incredible for this deck. Anything in this deck that lets you create multiple bodies ends up being super valuable. And really, really helps you grind your opponent out as the game goes on. But I am getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's have a quick word about the ride line itself. So, generally speaking, our grade 0 and our grade 1 are fairly standard. You know, grade 0 does nothing, then you ride on top of it, you draw a card. So far, so good. But this is also a pretty rare interaction for Vanguard, because when we play the grade 2, both of these have effects that trigger simultaneously. So the grade 1 says you Soul Blast to 0, and then proceed to generate the blast token behind the Vanguard, and our grade 2 is then able to search our deck for our in-archetype order. So, you know, like we were talking earlier, it's an EVA deck. Well, as you know, no EVA deck is complete without its orders. Now, our order in this case is Soul Blast 1. If your Vanguard is in Estacion, you put this card as a gauge under your blast, and then you proceed to check top 5 cards of your deck and call 1 to the rear guard. So again, we're talking about board generation, and a lot of sequencing is going to be really important in this deck, because as you're going to see later, our grade 3 is able to add cards to our hand, and this order is then able to add cards to the field. So kind of balancing those two effects alongside with the sack 3 is really where the skill expression for this deck comes up, because it helps make up for the gaps of, do you need a card in hand? Do you need a card on board? Do you need bodies on board? Do you need cards? Do you need something specific in hand? Do you really need anything? So all those interactions are really going to inform how you play the deck, and I think is what makes it really, really interesting. So eventually, when you're going to be riding into your grade 3 like the god gamer that you were born to be, our Estacion has effectively 2 effects. The first is, well, the important one is that when he attacks, you can discard 2 plant gauges, search your deck or drop for a blast, and call it to rear guard. Now, of course, all of our blasts are, well, token is, but you know, we don't worry about that part. When it looks for your blast, it effectively is looking for these 3 cards. So, like EVA, we're looking at cards from deck or drop in order to fulfill that condition. So the nice thing is, unlike with EVA, we don't need a Poison in Paradise, we can just search from drop. So you can run a lot of these cards at lower copies, so you'll find that we're going to be running these 2 at 1 and this at 4, just because we kind of need them to make the numbers, and these uses are so niche that the deck is really, really tight on space, because if you've pieced it together now, you'll see that, you know, we're attaching, you know, 1 order per turn, maybe 3 units, okay, 4. But we're discarding 2, but it scales by 3s, which is where you start realizing that one of the most important things in this deck is making absolutely sure that every single turn, whenever possible, you are seeing these 2 cards in circulation. So what they're effectively going to do for us is, Mushroom is 2 bodies and a soul, and this costs a soul and creates up to 3 gauges. Because, of course, it goes to gauge, it can call mushrooms, or it can call the combine, and both those will create our 2 bodies, and then we can try and generate something else. We want to stick 3 cards into the gauge and then draw a card. So again, one of the things this deck is super, super tight on is these types of resources. You're going to have to stay really on top of it and be really, really careful, or it's just going to run away with you. Now, generally, there is a bit of a flow between this and the Vigilla deck. So Vigilla wants to go second, Estacion absolutely wants to go first. And one of the ways that manifests is, of course, you want your numbers to be super aggressive. You see a lot of these numbers are like 10s and 15s and increments of that, and especially Blast Token helps that scale, which is really, really begging for you to go first, because it wants to hit all of its best numbers on your opponent's 10k turn and no later. So what effectively you find end up happening is that cards like our Obscurade, our grade 3 Obscurade, our Winter Dragon, are only really good going first, because you really want to try and pump those numbers, because you want to call an 8 behind it, and all of a sudden you're hitting your really, really aggressive numbers. But unfortunately, that's not always working out that way. So you'll find that you actually go into this a lot less frequently than you go into, say, grade 3 Obscurade. You'll find that actually a lot more often, you will see yourself going into things like our Combine Rusher, because as it generates a token, it's effectively 2 attacks in 1, or 1 big attack. But I think you'll find that the 5 attack lines are actually a lot more common than you'd think, because you do just need to pump those numbers super aggressively, but you do thin really quickly, so you find yourself that the game normally ends at maybe turn 4, maybe 5, one way or the other. So you're really trying to hit those numbers as early as possible, as aggressively as possible, to not give your opponent any room to breathe, because if they do, you're probably in for a bad time. The trouble with Estacion is that it's a deck that, once your opponent is able to heal once or twice or stabilize, really begins to show its weaknesses. So we're going to need a few more support cards, I think, before this deck really becomes playable. But until then, I think it's a really, really interesting locals choice, especially. Maybe in a team format, if you really feel confident. But I think the deck is actually really, really neat to play, and I would encourage you all to give it a try. And also, you get a good reprint in it. You get some Regas pieces, you get some Philanders, And if you pull a god card, then your name's Jeremy, and I don't like you. Now, of course, when we talk about a card being so important to your deck strategy, you find that recurring it becomes one of the most important things in your deck. And of course, when your deck relies so much around recurring a specific grade 1 or an order, and your clan is Stoicheia, well, there's really only one card to run, isn't there? We're going to be running Elvina at 4 copies. Now, what Elvina does for us is for EV3 on place, unfortunately, since it's a Stoicheia card, say it with me, from hand, again, that's where the sequencing from earlier is going to start mattering. What you're going to be looking to do is EV3 on place, either chase a non-Regalis piece order from drop zone or a grade 1 and add it to your hand. And, well, order to hand, grade 1 to rear. What that's going to be able to facilitate is you spamming your mushrooms and spamming your order every single turn. Because if you don't do that, you really start falling off with numbers and just kind of collapse and lose the game on the spot. But when it comes to the actual deck profile, let's start from the top. Of course, we're going to be running our 8 criticals. As we know, it's an aggressive decks, and aggressive deck want yellow cards. Yellow cards win games, and this deck tends to lose. So 4 of these cards could really be soul crits. The soul isn't too tight though, and you do want to be hitting numbers, which is why we opted for the 5Ks. But I don't think you're necessarily wrong for choosing the soul crits. I'm just greedy, and I don't think these games go on long enough. But I would absolutely not begrudge you for going soul crits. What does matter, and I will begrudge you and I will judge you for the rest of your life, is if you don't run 20k fronts. The reason for that is, although the deck can be a bit soul reliant, we do have to discard so much that we need to maximize our shield value sometimes, so we really can't go without that 5k shield. That 5k shield comes up way more often than the one soul does, and unfortunately for you, this deck doesn't have much of shield. That said, this is like EVA, this is not quite EVA. We do fold really quickly to pressure because we're a lot more piece reliant. Of course, we're going to be running 4 heals, although, again, here there is a bit of flexibility. I don't think you're wrong if you choose to run restand heals. I think almost every deck in the format right now is on them, or could be on them, because almost every deck gets restanders and it doesn't look to be getting any better. You know, whether you're Heartluru, Minerva, Bafsagara, Youthbug even. You know, when we get the Nebula Knights order in February, it probably will be. All of these decks are separately able to get a restand going of some sort, and that's where the shield is really going to start mattering. So I won't begrudge you for choosing that. Almost every meta deck has some form of restand. And finally, of course, we're going to be looking to Bless Favor, our Stoicheia OT, obligatory ban OT command. You know, but the most important thing here is there are other OT options, but unfortunately, none do it quite as well as Bless Favor. Nobody does it like the OGs. So the fact that it's a crit and a draw and a front and a heal is just too much to really, for anything else to really put up a fight. You know, purple OT is just not doing enough. Red OT is really not doing enough because often you're going for 5 lines, for 5 attack lines, and then like you'd really rather just have the front. I don't think it's generally worth it. Yeah, you'd rather have the front and the crit and the draw and the heal, and nothing really comes close, and nothing really makes it quite worth it to give up on the Bless Favor. Some things are classics because they're the best. As for our grade 1 lineup, of course, we're going to be running 4 Elvinas for the reasons we mentioned earlier, as well as 4 mushrooms. This guy really is this deck's MVP. I actually don't know what I'd do without it. It is such an insane card, and it's able to pump out so much early pressure and set up your blast token. So for example, there are lines where you just turn once, stick him in, make 2 tokens, go swing van, swing rear, especially if you go second. And then on the next turn, you make the blast token, call something off of your, off of the order you have to play, immediately sack the 3, draw another card. Like there are really aggressive lines you can make here, and none of them would be possible without the mushrooms. So it's been nice to see him come back. He's been a bit, missing in action for the past few months, so it's good to see an old friend come back. Of course, in terms of new cards, we got the appearance of Harvest Elf. So her effect is when she's played from hand, you can Soul Blast 1, make a token. But that's not what we're using it for, baby! At the end of the battle, it boosted, it can pop the thing that's in its column to draw 1 card. So say, for example, you end up calling, you have a column, you call this then on place will make you a token. Then this will be able to swing, pop the token, and you'll be able to draw a card. So it's really free resources, and with this deck, I'll be honest with you, I don't think in this deck you're ever complaining about drawing a card. I'm not gonna lie to you, I think those come up way more often than we'd like to admit. But unfortunately, because she's a 3/0, she used to be a 3/0, but because she has to be placed from hand, there were other things that we really wanted to add, so we kind of ended up cutting it to 2 in favor of another card that's going to come up in a little bit. So, for example, one of our previous lines had her at 3. One of our other cards is currently at 4, cut down to 1 or 2. And we're going to be able to talk about that soon, but that was a really, really cool card that I'm actually a lot happier with at 4. So, unfortunately, Harvest Elf was first on the chopping block and had to go. Oh, and look, we ran 4 PGs. One of those could probably be Elementaria, but I'm lazy, so we're not doing that. But yeah, if you wanted to, this would probably be 1 Elementaria. No harm, no foul. Do what you will. But, you know, do what you gotta do. I won't judge you. That's a lie. Yes, I will. Then, as far as our Grade 2 lineups go, of course, we're going to be looking at 4 Vital Blaze Blast. Blast them! This is the Bite and Blast. So, what as you said earlier, has the ability of kind of building a board for you. So you'll remember that our Estacion has an effect of on attack, discard 2 plant gauges, do the thing. So when he's discarded, he's able to give one of your blasts plus 5k. So this is all of your rear guards that are like from the Estacion trial deck, as well as Estacion himself. So you're able to really help pump those numbers and make them just about magical numbers to really poke your opponent. Because again, the thing with aggressive decks in Vanguard is it's a bit counterproductive, but one of the things they're checking you on the hardest is your ability to min-max your opponent's guarding. So this kind of gives you that little bit of flexibility, as well as setting things up for it. Now, the thing you've all been waiting for. The one guy to rule them all. Lechuga! But the thing with our little cabbage friend over here is he has the ability on Rearguard when called from hand. If it's not during the battle phase, you play a plant token, then CB1, and either choose one of your opponent's Vanguards and it gains plus 5k. But, you know, that effect's not real, baby! What we're really using it for is to give your Vanguard the ability that until the end of turn, every single thing called by an ability is going to get plus 5k. Apologies, OTK Granblue enthusiasts, this one is not for you. This is the card being used in a somewhat healthy deck. So the main thing we're liking it for here is the fact that A, much like our earlier discussed, you know, Combine Rusher, it's 2 bodies in 1, which is fantastic for our Blast token. Again, so many cards in this deck makes 2 bodies, which is invaluable for the Blast token. It really is what you live and die by. But also the fact that it gives plus 5k means every single token you make is plus 5k, everything you call off the order is plus 5k, everything you call off the Vanguard is plus 5k, and everything you can call off of the thing you call off either of those 2 is also plus 5k. So again, when we're talking about min-maxing your opponent's guarding, this is really where cards like this show up and shine. So this card, for example, used to be at 1 or 2 copies, but we ended up eating into 1 Harvest Elf and 1 more generic cycle card that I'm going to show you in a moment, that really, really came up and was super, super important. So because the deck tends to go first, at least ideally, you only end up really having 1 spare set of Energy Blast, which means we kind of have to pick and choose how we want to play the game. So generally, we can choose either our Energy Cycle or our one and only Ace Unit. So we used to be on one of the Pride Cycles, except Soul was a bit tight. We thought the shield would be nice. But unfortunately, it just wasn't really doing quite enough for us, which meant we eventually cut it for another cabbage, which kind of ended up making the 4-copy list that you see towards the end. I don't hate going back to it, but I think that the cabbage just offers a lot more for the deck than a Pride Cycle might have. I think the 1-of is like a bit unreliable, so you kind of don't see it enough for it to really be worth the inclusion, but hey man, it's your deck, cook it how you like. But of course, our cycle here is, as you all know, CB1, EV1 when guarded or discarded for Riot deck. You can play the cost, draw a card, hippity hoppity, get off my property. Or if you play it on rear guard, if you Persona Road this turn, importantly not from hand. So these 2 have a little bit of synergy going on, something. But yeah, so it lets you for CB1 or EB3 again, choose a grade 2 or less non-sentinel normal unit and add it to your hand, or choose any order and add it to your hand. And then you choose a card from your hand and discard it. So again, a lot of discarding going on in this deck, so that would have been like a little bit of synergy with the Pride Cycle, but we just didn't think that was really enough, so we opted to cut it in the end. As opposed to our Ace Unit, which on place gains 5k, and then EB1 top 7 to mill 1, and then a card from drop to hand. And then when it attacks your opponent's Vanguard, if they're grade 3, it gains 5k, and if your drop has 10 or more cards, it gains another 5k. But the important thing here is, the thing with Ace Units is, I know people know this, but just so you're aware in case you're new, the 5k, so the unique skill, even if you don't play the EB3 effect, that skill is burnt the moment it's placed, because the 5k is non-optional. So the second it's placed, it gains 5k, and whether you pay the EB3 or not, your unique skill is gone. So be very, very careful and do play the card with some intentionality. Make sure you plan your turns out and then play it accordingly. But the one interaction you can do here is you can, for example, call this, top 7 for anything, then call this. This will add either the order or the mushrooms to your hand, and then you're able to really aggress it from there and kind of pick up where you left off. Of course, with so much discarding going on with the deck, we're also going to be running our Protection Twincast as our Blitz order of choice, as our Regalis piece of choice, actually. So one of the things I was considering is you should be on Elementaria, but I've just had a few too many games of kind of getting stuck on multiple Blitz orders, and that's messed with me way too much. I'm not necessarily opposed to you being on Fire Regalis here either, but I do think that, again, the shield values are a little bit important here, you know? But, you know, I think you should be on Elementaria. I'm just a little bit lazy. And again, like we were saying, we're going to be running 4 of our Combine Russia. 4, Jeremy, that's insane! But what we're looking to do here is realistically, more often than not, what you'll find yourself doing is you'll have kind of your Vanguard, and then you'll end up calling one of these out off of the on-attack effect, and then calling a token to the other column. And obviously with your Blast boosting, and maybe your Cabbage proc, and maybe Persona Ride, like these are actually still hitting pretty real numbers. So just being able to poke out that damage a little bit at a time is really what's important, because what'll happen most of the time is the way your numbers line up is when you go to swing with the rear guards, what'll end up happening is the plant token, the blast token, will be on some increment of 3, so say 9, 12, and so on and so forth. And so what'll end up happening is you'll swing, they'll give, you know, 15, 20k to front row, but then what'll happen is when you swing, the things you call on the Vanguard swing will be 5k smaller, because you always fall below the increment, and then the next turn will kind of make up for it, and then you kind of do a lot of that tweaking. So you'll find that oftentimes you don't boost the first swings, so that the power loss actually isn't that significant. It also means you always have a place to put your triggers, which is really, really good. But like we said, you're also going to be running this one-off stat stick that, again, is not super important. The stun comes up sometimes. Sometimes you can punish like Minervas or something. So, you know, for example, with Minervas, you can stun their Restander, and then all of a sudden they kind of lose 1 or 2 of their attacks in battle phase, and then they have to spend a CB to restand it. It doesn't feel super good, but, you know, at the end of the day, this deck is all about disruption and kind of min-maxing the interruption and the shield to your opponent. So then, finally, 2 of the cards we're looking at are going to be our Persona Ride, because me when the deck is aggressive, well, I need numbers, and of course, the 1 copy of the Obscurate we were discussing earlier. Now, the one thing I will implore you to remember is that you need plant tokens, and you need lots and lots of plant tokens. So generally speaking, I think we found that the safe spot is like around 15, but I mean, I think that should generally be fine, but you know, since the deck only gives you 5, I would recommend that if you buy it, and I do recommend you buy it and support your local card store, this is certainly something you have to double check. Now remember that of course, all plant tokens except the Asher plant tokens are the same, so you can use V ones, you can use standard ones, it doesn't really matter. You can see obviously I'm using different ones, but I'm just a stylish guy. I don't know what to tell you. Like I'm just him. I'm just that guy. But you know, you can use, for example, the triple rare ones from the Clan Collection, or really anything you can find in a bulk box. So you know, ask around. And if you do need to get a hold of this deck, do consider checking our affiliate link to Big Orbit and TCGPlayer below if you find it interesting. But guys, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the deck profile. Again, special thanks to Pete, Ben, and Andre for helping me with the list. So guys, don't go anywhere. If you're interested, consider clicking up here for a video where I'm going to be telling you the decks that you should be considering for the upcoming BCS season. So until then, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye guys.